What's going on, everybody? My name is Dillard, bringing you guys another podcast, the Barnyard podcast number 25. And today I am here with a guest speaker. His name is Gerry, with a G, by the way, not a J. He made that
Yeah.
very clear before we started this podcast, so I don't want to get it wrong. But how are you doing today?
Good, Dillard. Thanks for having me on, man. Big fan of the show. Been watching. It's gonna be fun. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. So today we have quite a bit to talk about. The series in general, the doubleheader. I was at work. I told you about that. I didn't miss much other than Luke Voight is still a stud. He's still flaming hot right now. Um, by the way, because I actually tweeted it this morning as a good morning tweet, as of right now, Luke Voight leads the league in slugging, OPS, WOBA, and WRC plus. For those who didn't know, so Voight continues to stay red hot. I know you're a big supporter of Luke Voight. My family themselves are huge Luke Voight supporters. They actually still are. They still watch the Yankees just because of Luke Voight.
That's awesome.
They're still pissed off that the Cardinals gave him up for what, basically Jason Shreve and
Yeah.
Gallegos. But yeah, Luke Voight has been fire, literally fire. Pretty much the only person who has shown up lately. And I tweeted the other day, I was like, can we change the New York Yankees to the New York Luke Voigts? Because that's
He
basically what it seems like lately.
is
So
that much there for carrying this team. With all the injuries, he's still raking. And if anybody watched like the opening series, and that's when they started saying, "Oh, we want Mike Ford, we want Mike Ford." But if anybody who watched the games, Luke Voigt was smoking the ball, hitting line drives to third, line drives to center. It was only a matter of time. And now you're seeing, if you barrel the ball up and hit it hard, good things will happen. And he's been playing like an absolute beast.
hmm And I was actually happy whenever they announced. I know it was only for like one game, but whenever they had Luke Voigt leading off, and I've been
Oh,
like preaching this for weeks and weeks. I was like, put Luke Voigt in the leadoff spot. Like I want to see him in the leadoff spot. He's perfect. He's a high on base percentage guy, and like you said, he's on fire. He's gonna get on base or he's gonna hit a jack. You're
exactly.
either gonna take an early 1-0 lead in the first, or the majority of the time he's gonna get on base. I'm also down to also see Hicks leading off more because Hicks walks a ton,
Yep.
which leads us to our first discussion. Uh, Before I go ahead and give my little rant, because I posted pretty much every tiny detail on Hicks that I could muster up because so many people don't like Hicks, and it makes me very upset that people don't see the potential right in front of their eyes what Hicks possesses. But
Yeah.
before I go ahead and dive into that, give me your thoughts on Hicks.
I mean, I get a lot of shit too because I've always, kind of defended Hicks. Now, the one thing that Hicks, the knock on him is his health, and that's something that's completely fair.
Mhm.
He has to stay healthy, and for the past couple of years, he hasn't. Now, obviously, Tommy John, he's had some other, minor injuries, or he's been out of the lineup, so health is completely fair. But how often do you find a switch hitting center fielder who can hit for some power, plays the outfield plus defense, and gets on a base a ton? I mean, to me, I've always thought that a player like that would be very valuable to a lineup defensively and offensively. I mean, we have a lot of guys that could do damage in our lineup, right?
Mhm.
So if a guy's getting on base at a close to a 400 clip, there's gonna be a lot of opportunities from the score runs, a lot of opportunities for guys to drive him in with homers or hits or whatever it is. So I've always liked Hicks. I've always liked Hicks's game. I think
Mhm.
he is very underrated. Now, granted, the past couple games or maybe the past week, he's been scuffling a little bit, but he's just coming back from Tommy John.
Mhm.
Get his timing down, so on and so forth. You saw Didi his
Mhm.
first year back from Tommy John. He was struggling. Now this year he's playing really well.
Mhm.
But I like Hicks's game. Again, he's a center fielder that plays a plus center field. He's a switch hitter that can hit for some power, and he gets on base a ton. I think he's a useful player, and I think a lot of people, I don't know if they expect a lot more. And I mean, I expect more out of him too, but the hate that he gets, you'd think people would expect him to be Mike Trout. And
Yeah.
it's just not fair. I get there, Hicks sucks, this and that. And then you look at some of you go a little bit deeper, besides, people who look at batting average, they think that tells the whole story. We all know it doesn't. You look a little deeper at his walk rate, on his on base percentage, like you're about to say, getting some hits or runners in scoring position. Hicks is a very valuable or a very useful player on a roster. So I have no issue with Hicks. I know a lot of people hate him. I mean, his contract also is not crazy. It's $10 million a year. If you want to move it, you can move it. I had a debate with some people that his 10 million are not going to stop us from signing other players.
Mhm.
So I mean, yeah, I mean, I view Hicks as a good, valuable player, whereas everybody says he sucks and they hate him. So
Mhm.
it is what it is.
kind of off topic before I go ahead and dive into like all these analytics. But I've actually seen some tweets this morning, and I won't name names obviously, but I wanted to get your perspective, what you thought on it. There
Sure.
are people that are suggesting that the Yankees trade Hicks. What do you think about that?
I mean, honestly, if the package is right, it's one thing, but just trading him to trade him doesn't make sense to me. Number one, we always have a ton of injuries in the outfield. Hicks is always going to be used, and he's a good starting center fielder.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not actively looking to shop him, but obviously, if it fills a need, or if the trade package is right, in my opinion, there's not many guys that are untouchable, right? If we're able to get something that makes sense for us, we can do it. But I'm not actively seeking to trade Aaron Hicks right now. I mean, you have Mike Tauchman who could potentially play center, which is great. But I mean, like I said, if the right deal comes across, I'd be okay with it. But right now, I'm not actively seeking to move him. And I've seen other articles and things like that as well. Now, I won't be infuriated if they did move him, although I do like Hicks. But like I said, the deal has to make sense because we do have a plethora of outfielders. Tauchman. I love Clint Frazier. I'm a big Frazier guy. Clint Frazier, obviously Aaron Judge. And, we have a 30-year-old Giancarlo Stanton who can't even play the outfield anymore, but that's for a different day. But yeah, I mean, I'm not actively seeking to trade him, but like I said, if it makes sense, I don't have an issue with it.
I could definitely agree with you on the Clint Frazier. I was definitely very suspect last season just because his defense was absolutely atrocious. But, even though he's taken a few rough routes to the ball, so far he's made those routine plays that he needs to make, and he's been really good with the bat. And, I'm not going to say Clint Frazier is Cody Bellinger because that's definitely so far from the truth. But in a sense of, like, bat speed, there's very few guys that have bat speed such as, Bellinger or Frazier. And that's why I like Frazier because he's able to just extend his hands and get to the ball into awkward positions near the plate, whether it's low or high, like most hitters can't. And it's very impressive to see him do that on a regular, consistent basis. So I like Frazier. I actually said this in the past. If they're not willing to let Frazier play on a pretty much regular basis, with the fact that the team is struggling right now with injuries, it's basically 2019 all over again. He needs to either play on a regular basis and increase his value and help out the team, or he needs to be traded while his value is high right now for a starting pitcher. I don't know who that starting pitcher is. I know people have suggested Lance Lynn and Mike Clevenger. I'm a personal huge fan of Mike Clevenger. It could go many different ways. But those are pretty much the two options that you have with Clint Frazier.
I'm with you. And anybody who's followed me on Twitter, anybody who knows me, I've been one of Clint Frazier's biggest fans since day one. I remember when they made the trade for him. At that time, the Yankees were boring. I go to a ton of games, and I'd go to watch Dylan Betances, and I'd go and, when 16 we got Castro, I wanted to see Castro. But I didn't like Ellsbury. Headley was boring. A-Rod was old. Teixeira was old. The Yankees were a very boring team. And at the time, obviously they had Judge and Sanchez, those guys in the system. But at the time, we weren't the strongest as far as developing young players. So when we made that trade in 16, I instantly became a Clint Frazier fan. I loved his attitude. I loved his talent. I'm reading articles that morning, and they're comparing him to Trout, which is crazy. But anybody who has – and back to his defense, they said that he could profile as a center fielder. So I've always said that his defense is not as bad as it's shown. I know that sounds crazy, but what I mean is I went to a bunch of games in 17 when Judge was either DHing or somehow Clint was playing right field like 2 or 3 games I was at. And Clint played fine. And it was the concussion in 18 that really, really messed him up. I've heard him on a bunch of podcasts talking about his depth perception, his headaches, and obviously became skittish for the wall. And then he gets into his own head. Then he's worried about making errors. Instead of seeing the ball and going and getting the ball, he's worried about making errors. So I've always said, he played fine defense in the minors before coming up. He profiled as a center fielder when we traded for him. And when he came up in 17, he played fine defense. He wasn't a circus like he was in 18 and 19. So I think that he got into his own head. And, once he kind of shakes that off and mentally gets right again, I think he'll be fine. And like you said, with his bat speed, I think he can do damage. Now, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know last year when he came up in April and got sent down in June, I think he played to like a 117 WRC plus or something, 114 W, which is really good, really good. So, if he's up here, I think he could produce with a bat. And I've said the same thing you said, and that's if he's up here right now with all the injuries that we have, play him every day. You play him over Brett Gardner. You know what Brett Gardner is, and I like Brett Gardner. So when I say play him over Gardner. It's not Gardner hate. Listen, Gardner's been a lifelong Yankee. I love Gardner, but it's not his time. You know, we know what Gardner is. You have to play Clint Frazier every day. He's going to be productive. And even last night, he didn't have super success, but he hit the ball hard a lot last night. And I know he missed the game, but I mean, anytime he's up, I think good things can happen. So I'm a big Clint Frazier believer.
Definitely. So I wanted to go back on track with Hicks a little bit because I know you were very curious before the podcast, before we started, that you wanted to hear all these.
I can't wait.
This is going to be one huge rant. So I hope you're ready for this because
I'm ready.
I am a huge fan of Aaron Hicks. Now, I wouldn't be too I would agree with you in a sense that, you know, if we shop Hicks for a player that is more suitable or getting an opportunity that we could get a more solid player out of it, you know, a better opportunity, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I don't like him that much where basically you said, like, there's very few players in the league that are untouchable. Like, you know, Hicks is not a Trout or a Bellinger or a Yelich. You know, like those players are pretty much untouchable. But he's not untouchable. But in a sense of Yankee fans just love to hate on him because all they do is look at the fine print that's known as batting average, and they don't look at the whole other key of analytics such as on-base percentage, WOBA, WRC+, all those other statistics, you know, walks, someone on Twitter earlier today basically told me that on-base percentage means nothing. And I'm like, okay, so basically means nothing to get on base? Or is that what you're saying? So if a guy walks on, if Luke Voight comes up to the plate, or Aaron Hicks for that matter, and leads off and he walks, and then Aaron Judge comes up behind them, we'll talk about Aaron Judge in a little bit, but hypothetically in a situation where Aaron Judge is healthy and playing, if he bombs a 2-run homer, does that walk become meaningless? Would you rather have 1 run or 2 runs?
Should be getting on base is the goal, whether it's with a hit, walk, home run, whatever, you want to get on base. And if a guy's getting on base at a 400 clip, that bodes well for an offense that could do damage behind him. So I agree with you 100%.
Mm-hmm. So right now, sitting at the numbers in 2020, he has a 192 average. I get it. But average, like I said, is small print. It's not the whole piece of the puzzle. Right. His on-base percentage is a 344. His slugging is a 384, which, again, not great. Definitely slugging is something that, you know, is a key contributor to look at. And, you know, we know that he's a good switch-hitting power hitter.
And this is today, right? His numbers today you're giving?
Yeah.
And, so, you know, obviously, you know, he's went on probably about a week little slump. Before that, his on-base percentage was almost 400. So, like, you know, granted, you can't take out the slump, but he'll get back to getting on base again, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And then also he has a 321 WOBA and a 102 WRC plus with a .3 F4, which that's still an above average player.
Yes.
By every stretch of the imagination. I don't know why anyone would be complaining about those numbers. And then these are the numbers that really stick out. 18.9 BB percentage and a 16.6 K percentage. That's really good. It means Hicks is that type of guy that he's going to force pitchers to throw strikes. He's going to force you to work out the count. And I know Emily, you know who Emily is. Of course, Emily's awesome, but Emily's a big Hicks supporter too. And she stated something the other day on Twitter that made a lot of sense. And, you know, in a sense that she basically quoted and said that, you know, the reason why Hicks isn't getting as much hits and his average isn't as higher isn't necessarily that he can't hit the ball, but, you know, he's going to force you to throw strikes, and pitchers don't want to pitch to him. And he's not going to get a lot of good pitches to hit. Hence why he's walking, because he's forcing pitchers to try and work outside of the box. You know what I mean? So there's that. And then, like I said, it's only going to get deeper from here, so I hope you're ready.
I'm ready, man.
So I looked at pretty much everything that I could on Fangraphs. I might be missing something, so definitely if you think of anything, definitely let me know.
Sure.
But among qualified hitters in the league, Hicks is 4th in the league with an 18.9 BB percentage. Yep. Which that is beyond elite. Mm-hmm. I can't complain about that. I don't know how anyone could complain about somebody getting on base.
Yeah.
So here's also Hicks versus league averages. So he's .023 points higher in on-base percentage, which, you know, still counts. I mean, I know it's not a significant margin, but I think every point still counts, especially if you're above average at a specific aspect of a certain stat.
Right.
He's 9.6 points higher in BB percentage than the league average. That's absurd. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
He's 6.5 points lower in striking out. That's good too.
Which is every Yankee fan complains about, is that we strike out too much. And he's well below average, and they're still complaining about it.
Mm-hmm. And then we have it's very inconclusive. It's only a .002 points higher in WOBA and 2 points higher in WRC plus, but it still means that he's 2 points higher in WRC plus, so he's still above average hitter in a sense of WRC plus.
Sure.
Then this is the stat that's probably really going to grind people's gears. And a lot of people claim that Aaron Hicks is terrible with runners in scoring position. And I'm going to completely debunk that statement because that's false. With runners in scoring position as of this year, he has a 500 on-base percentage and 885 OPS, which is still league. It's like, I think it's a little bit above 100 points above league average in OPS. Then he has a 397 WOBA and a 154 WRC plus.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I'm like, what are you guys saying? He doesn't do anything with runners in scoring positions? Is it because you're only looking at the batting average? You're not looking at everything else?
They're very reactive. They'll see him like, God forbid, he flies out with a guy on second. Oh, he sucks. Yankee fans, what I've learned, they have very, 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 very short memories. Like I told you today, I have people wanting to trade Gleyber Torres. He was a 22-year-old all-star last year. Now they want to trade him after not even 30 games of a crazy 2020 season. They have very, very short memories. So it doesn't surprise me, but you're like me. Well, I'll sit down and look at the fine print. I'll say, this guy isn't bad. I'll try to tell somebody that, and they'll call me names or tell me I'm stupid or tell me I'm a moron and tell me analytics are dumb. And I'm just like, all right, whatever, dude. Like, just try to be better next time,
Those people are so ignorant in their own minds that nothing that you say could change. So that's what I've learned. It's just the mute button is just the best button in the whole world.
I agree.
To block out that type of.
A lot of like the older fans too. I've had a discussion last year with a guy who said, you look in the Hall of Fame, you won't find any, people who didn't hit 300. And I said, do you think Josh Donaldson had a good year last year? He's like, oh, had an MVP type year. He hit 260. Mm-hmm. Mike Trout didn't hit 300 last year. Like batting average is so antiquated. Mm-hmm. You have to look at some of the numbers that you discussed. It's just crazy to me that people are not adapting with the game. Mm-hmm. And, for you to sit there and tell me that, Aaron Hicks sucks with runners in scoring position, then you rattle off those numbers. It's like, what are you watching?
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
And I also brought up his numbers with just men on base in general. So with men on base, he's got a 405 on base percentage, a 920 OPS, so that's better. A 387 WOBA, a 148 WRC plus. I mean, his numbers are good. And then going back to runners in scoring position, he walks 30. He has a 35% BB. It's like, what? Like, that's absurd. And
I've had debates with people. I've said he should, lead off, and they're like, no, he shouldn't lead off. And I'm like, look at his numbers about getting on base. And I love DJ. I think DJ is one of, if not the most important parts of our lineup. DJ is a hit machine. Mm-hmm. So if you even slot DJ third, and you have Hicks and Judge who are both big on base guys, you give DJ a lot more RBI opportunities, which I'm completely fine with. And Hicks gets on base at maybe even a better clip than DJ, where Aaron Judge will have more RBI opportunities. So I was, all for switching that lineup up, but, people say, hey, look, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. DJ's batting leadoff MVP type, so leave him there. I'm like, all right, whatever. But I think you could make an argument where you can put Aaron Hicks as a leadoff, and he'll, like you said, if he has an on-base percentage approaching 400, he can hit for some power. He makes the pitcher throw a lot of pitches. So Aaron Judge sitting on deck, he might see an 8 or 9 pitch at bat, and it might help him for his at bat. So I think that it was a good discussion to have, but people didn't want to hear it. So it is what it is.
You watching the podcast, you definitely know it's kind of like a broken record. I probably have mentioned it on every other podcast at this point, but I've stressed that idea. It's like you said, if it's not fixed, don't break it. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Right. Completely got that mixed around. If they get the job done, that's all that I care about. If DJ leads off for the rest of eternity, as long as he's a Yankee I'm not going to be complaining. I'm really not, because he's going to get on base. But the thing is with DJ, he hits for such high contact, and he gets on base so frequently through hits that it's like, can we at least experiment with the idea of him hitting, third in the lineup? Because that's going to get him more opportunity, especially if you have, a Voight or a Hicks leading off, and then you have Judge, get on base. He's going to get on base too. I mean, Judge is really good at working out counts and getting on base through base hits, and you're giving DJ more opportunities. And I know RBIs are definitely more of a chance stat. They don't really mean anything. They don't mean that you're more of a more productive hitter than the other guy. It just means you're receiving more opportunities.
Right.
But to see that DJ in the leadoff position hit over 100 RBIs in the leadoff position,
Yeah.
That's absurd. Can you imagine how many more opportunities he'd have to drive in runs if he was batting, in the third spot or even the cleanup spot?
And then you got, if you do that, you have Hicks that leads off that gets on base. Judge gets on base. DJ gets on base. Then, you have guys, you maybe have a Voight or a Stanton or a Glaber hitting with two guys on, almost every night. And that's what you want. That's what you want. So like you said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of experiment with that. The way that Hicks was getting on base before his injury, the way Judge was playing, and obviously before his injury, the way DJ was playing. I think that it would have been cool to experiment with that. But, who knows?
Just to point out some other stats, because I still have a few more stats, just to kind of boast my ego about how good Hicks is. Yeah. So with runners in scoring position, he only strikes out 10% of the time. 10%.
And that's huge.
Yeah. And then with men on base, he walks 21.4% of the time and only strikes out 16.7% of the time. And then here's pretty much the ending slope, the climax of all of it that I have to say about Hicks. So this was from StatCast. 2017, he was top 6% in BB percentage. 2018, he was top 3 in BB percentage. And then 2020, he's top 1% in BB percentage. And then last but not least, I really told you that I digged into some really deep stats.
I love it.
So among hitters with 100 plate appearances or less, because I don't want to put in Hicks in the category of someone like Carlos Santana or Rhys Hopkins, who have had well over 100 plate appearances, around like 120 to 130. So anyone with 100 plate appearances or less, Aaron Hicks is first with 17 walks. And that's in 90 plate appearances.
Yeah, that's huge.
So it's just like, what more do I have to drill into people's heads for them to realize that this guy is productive and he's one of the best. He is one of the, outside of like him or a guy like Trey Turner, are exact models of what you want in the leadoff position.
Absolutely.
And I don't get it. There's just so much unnecessary hate. And I can't stand it. I really can't, man.
I'm with you. The number, everything Yankee fans complain about, it's hitting with runners in scoring position, striking out too much, and not getting on base. Everything they complain about, Aaron Hicks is the opposite, yet they still hate Aaron Hicks. And if it's injuries, whatever, the injury thing is fair to, kind of give him criticism, but all the other stuff, look, like you said, look at the fine print, because the numbers you gave me is exactly what Yankee fans want. They want a guy that hits with runners in scoring position. They want a guy that doesn't strike out with runners in scoring position. It's exactly what they want. And the fact that he gets so much hate, I mean, listen, nobody is above criticism, but he gets a ton of hate. And I think that, like you said, look at the fine print. I always thought he was a productive player because of what he brings to both sides of the ball. There's not, many center fielders that are able to do what he does. Now, if you looked, I forget the numbers. I should have pulled it up earlier. But I think after last year, if you pulled up like the center fielder F4 for the past couple of years, Aaron Hicks is right there, towards the top of that list. Of how productive he is, and significantly less at bats than some other guys. He's a productive player. So, I mean, and he's not getting paid a ton. $10 million in this day and age is not a shit ton of money. So I mean, the hate I think is way overblown for him, but people they have their guys, right? People have their guys they just hate, whether it's him, whether it's Sanchez, whether it's other guys, they have their guys they hate, and there really is no deviating from that. So.
Let me ask you a very interesting question, because I actually had Kyle on the podcast a while back, and I asked he actually asked me the question per se. But how do you feel about, because you're a big analytics guy? Yeah. How do you feel about Gio Urshela's defense, in a sense that a lot of people claim that it's misleading because he has a negative, defensive run saved, and his ultimate zone rating isn't that good, but specifically this year his outs above average is pretty solid.
It is solid.
So what do you think about that, in your opinion?
I am an analytics guy, but last year I've gotten into so many debates with people, and I watched every Yankee. And I'm not saying the eye test is the way to go, but I watch every Yankee game. Whether if I'm out on the weekends doing whatever, if I'm busy, I'll watch DVR, Yankee Encore. I watch every game. Gio Urshela, to me, was more than people were telling me that he was average at best last year. I mean, he's average at best. And I'm like, I get he's not Arenado, he's not Chapman, he's not those guys, but average at best, I think he's a little better than that. So, I mean, I think Gio Urshela is, from maybe the analytic community, is kind of an underrated defender. I think he is really, really good. Now, I don't know if that's just because I was watching Miguel Andujar play for a year, but I think Gio Urshela is a very, very good very good third baseman. And like you said, this year his outs above average are up. And I've always had an issue with defensive metrics. You know, I'm a little older, so I grew up during the dynasty years, and I watched Derek Jeter play throughout his whole career. So when somebody says to me that Derek Jeter was the worst defensive shortstop of all time, I'm like, there's no way in my eyes, there's no way that's possible. I mean, listen, he had his issues going to the left, but he made all the routine plays. He was he wasn't the greatest defensive shortstop, but the worst of all time, I couldn't. That to me made no sense. And analytics pointed to that. So I've always thought that the defensive analytics were always a work in progress. I always thought that they were not as accurate as some of the offensive analytics. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I think Gio Urshela is a very, very good third baseman that sometimes, in my opinion, gets underrated by the analytic community. I'll give you an example. I was having those debates last year, and people were saying, he's average at best. Some cases he's below average. And then whatever site they use, whether it was Baseball Savant, whatever they use, they changed their formula in the offseason. And it showed that Gio had a better rating than he did during the year. And then they were like, oh, okay, so he was, better than we thought he was. But you needed a number to tell you that. Like, to me, I was able to see that from watching every game. Like, obviously numbers help you. But, I mean, for me, it was no doubt that Gio was a very, very good third baseman. I mean, what do you think? Am I off base on this, or do you have a different opinion?
I'm definitely very inclined about the metrics, but I do know that if out of all metrics, if there's metrics that usually seem to be a little flawed or not as accurate as they could be, it's definitely defensive metrics. That's why I'm so glad that outs above average is a thing now. Because it definitely lets you look at it from a different perspective. As of right now, Gio's made 2 outs above average, which is pretty solid. I mean, it's not elite. It's not like, Arenado or Chapman level, but it's still solid.
I've never called him that. I never put him on that level, but I think he's, better than average at best. I'd say that. I think.
I would definitely have to, because they did basically adjust the DRS and the UZR from last year. Which it only said he saved 1 defensive run and had a negative 2.5 UZR. So, I mean, I can understand. I know there's a lot of plays that I personally saw that he kind of butchered, but it just, like, when he makes, like, so many highlight reels after highlight reels, it's like, Gio Urshela is what I call, and I put him and Zach Greinke in the same mix for different reasons. Because Zach Greinke is just a wild character. This is why I call him that. But Gio Urshela, in his own right, is the international man of mystery, because he pretty much, in a sense, he made so many highlight reels that it just became hard to distinguish. Like, okay, well, I'm looking at Fangraphs and they tell me that, he's a below average defender in terms of defensive runs saved and ultimate zone rating. But every time I look at the guy play, it's like, occasionally he does butcher the routine plays that he should get in front of. But he's no, Gleyber Torres at shortstop, for example, or no Miguel Andujar at third base. I mean, to be fair, pretty much anything is better than Miguel Andujar at third. I know Devers is kind of scratching the surface of that a little bit, which a lot of people were like, it's a topic on its own where they were like, oh, maybe Devers, a few plays that he made at Yankee Stadium, and it's like, like if you're around like the -1-2 range, where you're almost like at the average range, especially with a guy like Gio Urshela that made so many highlight reels, you could get fooled into thinking that, either he's a good defender because of those plays, or he's a bad defender because of these defensive metrics at the time that weren't adjusted accordingly.
And I just know, and after watching Andujar, I think that Yankees were like one of the last teams in the league at turning double plays from third base, and then Gio completely changed that up. So, I mean, I think he's a solid defender. I mean, just from watching, I know I've had my issues with defensive metrics over the years. Sometimes I think that they have overrated guys. I remember a year I was having a debate. I believe it was 2015, and Baseball Reference had Kevin Kiermaier with a higher WAR than Nolan Arenado. And to me, that drove me nuts. And I think that was the year he won the Platinum Glove, Kiermaier. And I was debating with people. I'm like, there's no way he was a more productive player than Arenado. I mean, Kiermaier had, 10 homers? And Arenado, in his own right, is a great defender. So to me, that made no sense. So from then on, and with the Jeter stuff, I thought defensive metrics, to me, was flawed. But it has gotten better. Like you said, the outs above average is huge. And I use Baseball Savant and that stuff all the time. But, I've always thought maybe the defensive metrics were, like you said, if there was going to be a metric that's flawed, it would be defensive. Mm-hmm. But you're right. Gio does make a lot of those highlight reel plays, whether it's going in foul territory, making a dive and play, whatever it is, that you might think he's better than what he is. But I still think that he's not a below average defender like people were saying last year. That's my opinion.
I will definitely admit that from last year, I definitely was more on the analytical side. I wasn't calling Gio Urshela below average,
right?
But I definitely didn't think he was as good as people were putting him up to be.
Sure.
But then when Baseball Savant came out with their outs above average and updated everything, and then we saw his out above average from this year. Like I said, he has 2 outs above average for this year so far, and then in 2019 he was in the 71st, like in the 71st percentile range, which is above average. So after outs above average came out, I was like, oh well, maybe I was just relying too much on analytics. Even though I did watch pretty much every game I could. Yeah. There was pretty much the only games I missed last year. I missed maybe 15 games, because of work. That's right. Pretty much unavoidable. But every other game, and even then, I would still go. Even if the Yankees lost, I would still go back through highlight reels and kind of go back and see what happened. So definitely would say that I was fooled by the metrics more. They definitely could be more, perfected and more adjusted. But that's why I'm glad outs above average is a thing, because they're definitely showing and proving that Gio Urshela is a better defender than people like me or other people were giving him credit for.
Right.
So,
and hopefully he keeps it up. So.
Yeah, hopefully he's I would be lying. Like, even with what I thought about him last year with defensive metrics, I would still be lying if I sat there and told you last year that regardless of the metrics, he wasn't an exciting player.
Right.
Like at the like a hot corner. Kind of like you said, it might have been just the fact that we were so used to Miguel Andujar that it seemed like anything was a major improvement. Even Devers would have been a major improvement. And Devers is like I was going to say earlier, he made a few good plays one of the Yankee series.
I remember in New York. He played like Matt Chapman, and then the next series he was throwing balls over to first baseman's head. Crazy.
And it's like, well, there's the Devers I know, because it just proves that Devers apparently didn't learn anything. He's not improving defensively. At least I haven't seen any signs of him. And that's a good reason why sample sizes are very important.
Absolutely,
people need to realize that sample sizes are very important, because they can tell you a lot about a player.
This year there hasn't even been like 30 games, I don't think, and people are putting labels on guys, and the size, it's such a small sample size. Like, people are saying that Gleyber Torres is that he doesn't work hard or this and that, and it's like, I know I'm big on the Yankee social media, so I follow all these guys. I know for a fact not only Gleyber but Gerry, they bust their ass in the offseason. Gerry is number 1 in pitch framing. Last year he was the worst ever in pitch framing. So he works. He's not the perfect player, but to call him like lazy and he doesn't work is crazy. And it's such a small sample size, but with the shortened season, everything gets magnified. So like if it was 30 games and 162, you wouldn't even think anything of it. You'd be like, all right, you look up in July and he'll have his numbers and he'll be all right as far as Gleyber's concerned. But now I see people jumping off the Gleyber bandwagon. Then 30 games, and the kid's 23 years old. I mean, defensively, he hasn't been great. And this is what I said about Gleyber. I never said that he was going to be a Gold Glove shortstop, but I said he came up as a shortstop, throughout his whole career. Can we give him a little bit of time? I look at a guy like Marcus Semien. He was brutal. He led the world in errors. Now he's one of the better shortstops. Like, Gleyber has the athletic ability. Can we give him more than half a season last year and 30 games this year to see if he can cut it at shortstop? And, hey, if he can't, he can't. But I'm not willing to say – he sucks, he's trash, he's never going to be a shortstop. I was at fault with that kind of with Luis Severino. I never said he was trash, but I said I think Severino is best suited for the bullpen based off what I saw in 16 when he came up. Then he comes out in 17 and finishes top 3 in the Cy Young. So I was completely wrong about that. So I think sample size, like you said, are very, very, very important. So I'm not willing to give up on Gleyber, whether it's at the plate or whether it's in the field just yet. Now, granted, he has a ton of work to do on the field. He's looked terrible, but maybe he can improve. And if he can't, if he's like this for the next year or so, then you can make a move. But I think that, like you said, sample sizes are extremely important when it comes to evaluating guys.
I have 2 very kind of random questions for you, because I want to get your opinion on them. One of them I actually tweeted about probably close to like 3 weeks ago now. I don't know this. The only person who's really going to know this is Gleyber Torres and what's going on inside of his head. Yeah. But what do you think of the idea of the fact that Gleyber Torres isn't performing at the level that people think he should be because of the high expectations that were given to him before the season started, and he's getting in his own head? Like I said, nobody's going to know that unless it's Gleyber himself. Right. But what are the possibilities that it's more of a mental thing? Because there are certain circumstances where I've seen that Gleyber just doesn't look comfortable at the plate, and he sure as hell doesn't look comfortable at shortstop.
Yeah. And, I actually agree with you. I brought that up, I think it was on Twitter not too long ago either, where he's in his own head. And you can tell at the plate sometimes, like, he doesn't look comfortable. His swings look, awkward. He's pressing. He's trying to, erase a, bad 2-week stretch in one at bat. And, he's got to remember, he's only 23 years old. So, he'll learn that you can't do that, So I agree with you. I think, a lot of it is, hey, you're the Yankee shortstop. I think that he sees the articles written, or maybe he doesn't see it. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it is, can he cut it? Can he hack it? It's short. And I do think a lot of it's in his head, because you saw the other night, or maybe it was a week and a half ago, when he was having trouble even throwing the ball to first. You could see he was kind of trying to aim it, and he wasn't just reactive, getting it and throwing it. So to me, that means he's in his own head. Because I know for a fact Gleyber Torres has the arm to field a ground ball and gun it to first. And there he was trying to aim it. I think Luke Voight had a scoop one. I think one might have, went wild. But I think I agree with you. I think some of it is in his head. And maybe this break will be good for him. Maybe he'll come back and take off like we think. Because he was on the doorstep of being a superstar. He was playing, pretty good in the postseason. He had a great year last year. He had a great rookie year. 23-year-old season. He had 38 homers last year. You figured he'd take that next step. Granted, if it was a 162-game season, you figured he'd take that next step. And, I agree with you. I think maybe a lot of it, or at least part of it, is mental with him right now.
Okay. And another question. It was kind of pretty much like out of the blue. I kind of thought about it, because we talk about average and the fact that it's such a small chunk of production out of everything that people love to leave out. Everybody just loves to look at average, and it's like, you don't look at their on-base percentage, their slugging, their WOBA, their WRC plus, yada, yada, yada. I can go on and on. So I wanted to ask you, and I actually was trying to find the tweet, and I found it. I tweeted it not too long ago. Actually, this month. It feels like I tweeted this like decades ago for some reason.
How this year's going.
But I wanted to ask you about how you feel about errors.
Okay.
Because the reason I asked that is because you're a big analytical guy.
Yeah.
I tweeted this month, actually August 2nd to be precise. Not that it really matters, but I basically use an example from Matt Chapman, because Matt Chapman is my favorite. I will literally sit here and argue on why Matt Chapman, he's definitely a top 10 player, I think. And I think because of his defense,
for what he can do on both sides of the ball, I agree. Yeah.
I've seen people argue that he could be a top 5 player in the league, and I could see that. Like, I could see just right on the margin, top 5 player in the league. But I saw this stat, and I was like, this is very interesting, because people love to criticize players for errors. Yeah. And I was like, well, in 2018, and this is all obviously a non-qualified third baseman, because you want a large sample size. It's better than smaller sample size. Chapman committed the second most errors in the league. Yeah. But on the flip side, he led the league with 30 defensive runs saved, 10.9 ultimate zone rating, and was second in the league with, outs above average, which he was only behind Arenado in that, but he was above Arenado, and it wasn't even close. In Chapman, I think a lot of people, I'm not going to say Arenado's overrated, because I love watching Arenado.
Right. Defensively, you mean, or just as a whole?
Well, more defensively, I would say.
Yeah, because if you look at his home road splits, they're drastic.
Yeah. And I actually, kind of a teaser for a podcast, the next person I'm going to have on is Emily, and we're actually going to have a full-on Arenado versus Chapman debate, so that's going to be fun. Nice. But, Chapman is in a completely different league of his own. The only defender that I can think of right off the top of my head that is significantly better, and he is even significantly better than Chapman is Andrelton Simmons. Yeah. Andrelton Simmons he literally, at this point, Andrelton Simmons could be inducted into the Hall of Fame from defense alone. His defense is spectacular.
Right.
But I just want to get your thoughts on that, because a lot of people are like, it's kind of like the average. It's like you don't look at the bigger chunk, and it just shows that Chapman is a GOAT at third base.
I agree. When it comes to looking at the errors, is probably one of the last things I look, or if I even look at. So I agree with you that it is one of the more antiquated stats and maybe a stat that does not hold a ton of weight. So I agree with you. And I've actually tried to tell people that as well. Oh, so-and-so had this many errors, that many errors. And I'm like, well, look at the other metrics. It shows that he is whether it's average or above average position player. So I agree with you. I think that errors are something that, at least for me, it's one of the last things that I'll look at when evaluating a player. Now, sometimes I'll use errors if I'm, everybody you talk with, they don't either understand or they don't follow the analytics part of it. So sometimes I try to, put it where they'll understand the point I'm trying to make. So sometimes I'll use errors in tweets or whatnot to, show that somebody's either good or bad, as long as that coincides with their other numbers. So if a guy has a high amount of errors and he also has a negative DRS, I'll use errors because they're not going to listen to me if I say, hey, so-and-so has a negative DRS. They'll be like, that's analytic BS, So I agree with you. It's one of the stats that I don't use a ton. I think there are a lot of other stats out there that you can look at to evaluate a player rather than errors.
I will definitely say I think there is only one statistic I think that is worse than average, and that is fielding percentage. That is the most godforsaken. I don't remember the last time I ever seriously looked at fielding percentage.
Me too.
Like, it's just it's just so useless, and I can't believe that people still use fielding percentage on its own.
I haven't had many people use that, to me at least, but I never ever look at that. I never look at that.
So I guess the last thing I could tell you, because I don't want to dive in too much about it, because obviously me and Emily are going to dive into it very extensively, and I'm very excited for that. And I might throw in some jabs at Tatis and Trout just on purpose, just to get her fired up, because she loves Trout and Tatis. Yeah. I mean, honestly, who doesn't though?
On a team that's not like 9-21, I mean, it's crazy. Crazy.
Which, I mean, like I said, who wouldn't be a fan of Trout or Tatis? I mean, Tatis is a whole nother world of his own. But I want to give credit, and you'll probably appreciate this because obviously you're big into analytics. But everyone's talking about Tatis, which I don't want to downplay what Tatis is doing. It's not to downplay him; it's to give someone else respect. Everyone's talking about Tatis, but no one's talking about Mike Yaz. Absolutely nobody is talking about him. Yeah. And it's
hard because he plays on the West Coast. He doesn't have like that flair that Tatis has. But if you look at his numbers, like you pull up Fangraphs and you see who the top guys on that list are, Yaz is right there. I mean, he's top. I mean, at the time I checked, he was like top 3. I mean, he's been unbelievable.
Him and Tatis are literally tied for first with two F4, and it's like there's so much coverage over Tatis, which is I'm glad, because it seems like the MLB is finally starting to come to grasp with how to market their players better, which I've always complained about for years and years. They don't do a good enough job at marketing like the NFL or the NBA do, for example.
No, and that I actually had a debate. I talked to John Jastrzemski.
Yeah.
So I talked to him about that too, because I'm big into podcasts. Mm-hmm. So I listen to a ton of podcasts that have players as guests, where players are able to kind of just be themselves. Mm-hmm. I think the game is in such good hands. There's a lot of talented players, but there's also a lot of players with great personalities that nobody knows about. Like, I'll listen to a podcast and I listen to one with Archie Bradley on it. I knew nothing about Archie Bradley. I listen to the podcast. I'm like, yo, this dude is awesome. Like, I'm going to root for him to do well if I see him on TV. Where, MLB does not do any promotion of their guys like that. Like, and they should, because the game is in such good hands. There's so many good personalities in the game, and they've continually, crapped the bed with, going down with whether it's marketing their players or taking advantage. I mean, look, we had an opportunity earlier in the quarantine to be the only show in town, literally the only sport on TV where the whole nation would probably watch. They were starved for sports. They were starved to bet. And what do? We bickered between the owners and the players and dragged it out for another 2 months. Now the NBA is involved. Now you have other sports involved. And it's like we had our opportunity to grow our game right there as well. And I think that Manfred's done a terrible job. I hate all those little cockamamie ideas about runners on second, home run derbies, and extra innings. I hate all that stuff. I think they've done a bad job in marketing the game. And it sucks because, in my opinion, the game's in really good hands. Now, granted, they don't have like a Ken Griffey Jr. type player. But, they have a guy like Tatis. You have these a guy like Soto. You have these young guys who are so talented that, the casual fan might not realize how good they are or their personalities. Acuna, the game's in such good hands right now. And we've done such a crappy job with marketing. It's crazy.
And that's one thing I am very thankful about, the fact that I'm really big into analytics, because I get a chance to really dive into every player from every facet of their game and kind of see how they are, in general, how they act on each side of the field. And it's honestly just, it's such a disgrace that there's so many players that are so talented, yet they're not getting any recognition. Like Mike Yaz, or big one, a huge one is Brandon Lowe. Nobody even flinches when you say anything about Brandon Lowe, and I'm like, he's third in F4 and he's been killing it for the Rays, and nobody wants to talk about him. You could go on and on. Kyle Lewis for the Mariners, he's been killing it. He's having a breakout season. Ian Happ, the Cubs are killing themselves because they didn't bring up Ian Happ before, giving him more opportunity. So it's like there's so many good players that nobody knows about, but it's like either A, people are too stubborn to try and educate themselves, and they only focus
the blackouts
on
don't help either, where you can't watch games. That to me is crazy, but that's more on the networks or whatever. But that's crazy to me.
I will say though, because for example, most of my family, they don't care about stats. They just care if their team wins. If you're one of those people that just goes out and watches your team and you don't care about analytics, you just care about your team winning, that's cool. That's definitely cool. I'm more talking about the people who want to have arguments on Twitter and have no idea what they're talking about. That's more the situation. But it's just like there's so many talented players that are doing so many good things for their teams, and it's like the MLB is just silent.
I agree.
Nothing. They're not broad. They're not. I don't know. It's just so stressful. Like I could rant on and on for hours and hours upon end on why they're doing such a terrible job, and that's why I like watching podcasts. The one that has CC Sabathia. I like to hear what CC Sabathia has to say. I like the podcast. Some of the Barstool podcasts, not all of them, but some of the Barstool podcasts. I like seeing things from like Trevor Bauer or just any player in the league. Like if I don't know who the player is, let him get a chance to speak. No one's ever going to know what these guys' personalities are like if they don't get a chance to express themselves on a platform where people can see it,
And they should market those platforms. I see the NBA. The Ringer is huge. Jalen Rose, Bill Simmons, they pump that out like, it's a huge brand. And you have, like you said, R2C2 is one of my favorite podcasts. And, the different guests they have on there, whether it's Adam Jones, even like Sonny Gray, who I really was not a Sonny. I liked the trade, and then when he came here and he didn't perform, I was like, get this guy out of here, whatever. But he actually is a really cool dude and a really good dude, and he goes in depth about his issues in New York. And I think a lot, not a lot of it, but some of it could have been prevented or fixed. And Sonny Gray comes off as like a good dude, and people don't get that. I always have arguments on Twitter about Gray that are like he couldn't handle New York. I'm like, I don't think that was the case. Like, listen to this podcast, and he goes in depth on what went wrong in New York, and that's part of the reason why Larry had to go. We needed to bring in Matt Blake, and look, I know our rotation isn't really lighting it up, but we need to adapt with baseball. And these other teams were using these, and look at Houston. They were one of the biggest. Everyone who says they hate analytics and then want to say, oh, we should be more like the Houston Astros, before they got busted for their cheating. Houston Astros is they've been one of the biggest analytic teams in baseball. So, you got to adapt with the game. You have to adapt with the game. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think a lot of these players have such good personalities and so much talent that the casual fan has no idea. I have friends that watch baseball casually who don't know who, like you said, a guy, or even like a guy like Bo Bichette, he plays in Toronto. He doesn't play for like a marquee team in the United States. So people don't really know how good he is. He's incredible. Austin Meadows is a really good player. They don't understand it. And I listened to R2C2 when they had Glasnow on. He's a cool dude. Like, they have to start marketing these players' personalities and these players' talents, because the game right now, in my opinion, is in really good hands.
That's a very, very, very good point. Like you said, we could ramble on and on about the way that the NBA and NFL do a really good job of marketing their players, but the MLB is just doing a really poor job and poor excuse, and they could do a lot better. There's no room to make excuses when you could do better. It's actually funny that you mentioned Sonny Gray, because I remember when I watched that podcast, I was not expecting that.
Exactly.
Like Sonny Gray's personality is so live. And it's like,
Yeah,
how could you couldn't like if you were teammates with the guy, you couldn't help but love the guy. He's
I
just
agree.
a very fun, loving guy who
Yeah.
just wants to win and play baseball.
Yep.
And you can't go wrong with anything like that.
I
You know what I mean?
agree. And he's been on twice. So when he came on as a Yankee, I was like, damn, I find it really hard to hate Sonny Gray now. Like, he's a cool dude, and he was a Yankee, and he wasn't playing well. And then obviously when he came on after the fact, with CC and Rucco, I was like, oh, this guy, he's a cool dude. Like you said, fun-loving guy, loves baseball, and kind of went in depth on what went wrong in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, damn, that sucks, because I now I like the guy.
Mm-hmm. Kind of touch bases on your analytics. It's funny that you say a lot of people don't like analytics, but you look at the Astros, and a big team that you look at right now that the Yankees should be definitely keeping a close eye on is the Rays. The Rays are one of the smartest front offices in baseball, and they literally use analytics.
And they have the number one prospect still in their system.
Exactly.
So they're dangerous.
Yeah. And it speaks volumes about the Rays. Like,
Absolutely.
I don't like the Rays, obviously, for obvious reasons, just because I'm a Yankees fan.
Yep.
But I can definitely sit there and respect that team. I think Kevin Cash is an excellent manager. He's done so good at staying with them and building with this team. The analytic department continues to thrive. They, that the Rays in general for their prospects system and their farm system is just ridiculous. They're kind of getting to that point, with the Dodgers, where the Dodgers just keep pumping players out left and right that are MLB ready. That's basically the Rays, especially with relievers. I mean, it just seems like
days.
Yeah, and it just seems like every single reliever that comes out and faces Yankees. That's the big thing that I complained about for a few weeks, in the sense that I'm going to give the Rays credit, because people don't realize how ridiculously good their bullpen and their pitching is in general, and people are. And I'm kind of flabbergasted, and it's like, they're in our division. You guys aren't paying attention close enough to them. You should be paying attention to the Rays. If there's one team that's going to step in front of the Yankees, if there's one team the Yankees need to beat to win the World Series, not just this year, but years following, because the Rays are going to be good for a while.
Absolutely.
They're going to have to beat the Rays. There's no other team right now that I mean, you could argue the Athletics. The Athletics are a really fun, exciting team.
I think they're loaded too. Yeah.
But as far as pitching, there is not a single team that I could name off right now that has a more solid foundation consisting of their starting rotation and their bullpen than the Rays. It's pretty much as good as it's going to get. I mean, every other reliever that pitches has filthy breaking pitches. I mean, Chaz Rowe, for example, is just disgusting. The break on his pitches.
And he was unhittable. And Alvarado, who was, he looked like a video game last year. He's been hurt for them.
Mm-hmm.
He comes back. They have arms for days, and obviously, they're starting pitching with Morton, Glasnow, and Snell. They're really good. Mm-hmm. But, to your point, that's what I made a point on Twitter as well. People are like, the Yankees can't hit the Rays. The Yankees never hit the Rays. And I'm like, you guys realize how good these bullpen arms are? Like, not many teams can hit these bullpen arms. I always think, Yankees can't hit good pitching. Well, that's why it's good pitching. Like, the guy has a 2.0 ERA or 2.5 ERA. Not a lot of other guys are hitting them either. Mm-hmm. So I agree with you. Watching that series against the Rays, when it was in the Trop and in New York, I was like, yo, these guys literally can bring a guy out of the bullpen, mm-hmm. and he's throwing nasty breaking pitches or throwing 98 miles an hour. It's crazy.
And I think a lot of people, I don't like giving the Rays credit, but when they deserve credit, I'm gonna, even if it's the Red Sox, if they deserve credit, I'm gonna give it to them. Period. Like, if I don't like the team or not, yeah. I just tell it how it is. But the Rays, a lot of people forget that last year the Astros were on the edge of strings in the ALDS versus the Rays because of the Rays pitching, and that's the thing. The Rays, if they, they still have potential in their farm system, obviously, to grow. And that's going to be for years and years to come. And Yankee fans and anyone who's a fan of any team in that division, Red Sox, Orioles, Blue Jays, or Yankees, you're going to have to get used to the Rays being good, because they're going to be good for a while. I don't know how long, but at least for the next, I would say,
a lot of guys on the
5+ years or so.
Yeah.
But like I said, a lot of people forget that the Rays put that hard hitting Astros team, on the frets of being eliminated simply because of the pitching. And it's like, could you imagine if the Rays boasted, a guy, like, if they were lucky enough to even have one more special bat in their lineup, like a Luke Voight or something? You know how much one hitter like that would change so much for that team?
Huge. If they had a middle of the order bat like that, who can, back those arms with some runs, it would be ridiculous.
Yeah, they would be like some teams I'm thinking about is like maybe like the 2016 Cubs or like the
Yeah.
2005 White Sox, just like a historic, really, really good team.
I even
That
bring it back to like the '90s Braves, who have a deep rotation, deep bullpen, and good bats in the middle of that order. Like they're a really good team. And people, just because they're the Rays, they play at the Trop. People need to realize that if you put the Rays in a different uniform, they'd be more talked about in the mainstream media. They are a really, really good baseball team.
Mm-hmm. And that just kind of proves the whole marketing thing. It's like the Rays have been one of the better teams this year and last year, and nobody talks about them. Nobody bats an eye because it's the Rays. They play in a circus tent basically.
Yeah.
Which I hope the Rays are investing in an idea to get a new stadium, because I think they should.
I know they've been trying. Hopefully at some point that happens.
But even regardless of how much I don't like their stadium, it seems like a lot of Rays fans also pretty much. It's kind of funny. There's a lot of Rays fans that don't even like their stadium. But it's crazy because they get so much. Their TV ratings are excellent, but they only get like, what do they average, like 2,000, 3,000 fans each game? Even if that, it's not a lot. But still, it's like the MLB is doing nothing to market this team, and there's no reason they shouldn't be being marketed with as good as they are, because they are right now. Whether people want me to say this or not, they are a World Series contending team right
100%.
now, and they're only going to get better. So, I'm going to say it like it is. So. I guess the last thing that I could lead off, just to kind of get like some different opinions on it.
Sure.
What do you think's going to happen as far as the postseason is concerned? Like, maybe not list off every team, because there's going to be a lot of teams in the postseason, so it could be very wild. At this rate, the Orioles could get in the postseason, which I kind of hope they do.
That'd be cool.
I think it'd be really cool.
Chaos.
But it's like, in your own opinion, like, who do you think? I guess probably the top three teams, I would say, from the AL and the NL, who have the best chances of winning the World Series, in your opinion?
The thing with me is, like, I despise this playoff matchup because, look, the Yankees could go undefeated and they could win every game, and they still have to play a 3-game series at potentially a remote location against a team that, if you beat Gerrit Cole, or even if you win game 1 against Gerrit Cole, 3-game series, anything could happen. Anything could happen. So there really is not, besides batting last, there is not a distinct advantage in this postseason. Because if you're playing remote with no fans, I don't think people realize, and I mean some people do, but how big fans are in October. I've been to a ton of playoff games. I remember, I forget who it was for Oakland. Jesus, is going to really bother me. Maybe was Fernando Rodney there?
Was it what's his name? Let me look it up. Just
I thought it was whoever
was it Kyle Hendricks?
Well, no, the relief pitcher, after Aaron Judge hit the home run, one of the relief pitchers said after he hit the home run, and the way that the crowd was, the game was over. And for them to think that, and obviously you saw it in 17 with Houston, you saw it in 17 with Cleveland, like, home field advantage means something. You see it in Houston with us. We go there. So to not have any home field advantage, to not have fans, 3-game set, which is even a bigger crapshoot than the normal playoffs. Anything could happen. I mean, in the American League, I like the Rays. If the Yankees are healthy, obviously I like the Yankees. And then I'm like you. I was big on Minnesota, but now I think I'm even bigger on Oakland. I think Oakland is a very, very good team. I think when I was doing my fantasy baseball prep, I'm like doing my rankings, and I'm looking like, damn, I have a lot of players from Oakland on this list. So I think in the AL, those would be my top teams right now. Would be Tampa because of their arms, the Yankees because I'm never not going to pick the Yankees, and then my other team, I really like Oakland. The other teams that, the White Sox are making some noise. Obviously, the Twins are a good team. But those would be my top 3 teams. But in this format, you just never know. You never know what could happen. And obviously in the NL, you have the Dodgers. You have the Padres. If you look at it, I looked the other day on Fangraphs really quick. They're like, and I know Paddock's been bad, but their starting pitching WAR is like top 6 in baseball. So not only are they, hitting the ball, they're pitching the ball as well. So if they're able to do that in October, they're a dangerous team. A team like the Cubs, who I think is a dangerous team as well. But again, you have a 3-game set and a remote site. Anybody could beat anybody, in my opinion. That to me is like a huge, huge crapshoot. So I think I don't like the playoff format. I think this year is kooky, and I've had super heated debates with people who try to tell me that this year is legitimate, which, if somebody wins a World Series, oh, it's a legitimate World Series, which I disagree with, because of, the COVID stuff and because of the no fans and because of the playoff format. But I would say, without looking off the top of my head, those are the three teams in both leagues that I could see, being a force in the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm not even going to bother saying mine because you basically read my mind with all of them. I will say the one team, obviously a lot of people have seen that they've been playing really good, but the one team that kind of, I wouldn't say like scares me, but I would definitely keep a close eye on them. I know they haven't had the best track record as of recently, like the Twins have in the postseason. Yeah. But the Athletics, it's like the thing about the Athletics that I really never count them out is because they are one of those teams that if the Athletics are hot, they stay hot. And that's exactly what you need in the postseason. And like you said, it's like neutral ballparks. So the fans, it's pretty much anybody's game this year. For all I know, the Orioles could somehow win the World Series. I mean, the odds are very slim, but it's like, for all I know, it could happen just because it's there's so much uncertainty in the air.
It's a crapshoot, man.
But if there's one team that would scare me in a sense of they get hot and they stay hot, it's definitely the Athletics. Yeah. It's only going to be a matter of time before they, like the Twins, they finally push that barrier of at least winning a series in, postseason.
And with no fans in the crowd, I mean, that helps a team like Minnesota. Minnesota comes in Yankee Stadium and they piss down their legs every postseason. I was at the Didi Grand Slam. I was at the Didi 3-run homer, the wild card game. When the crowd gets like that, a team like Minnesota, they used to get rattled, and for me being a fan, like I'm always, at games, I'm counting outs. But when Didi hit that homer to tie the game up, I turned to my buddy. I said, there's no way in hell we're losing this game. And I think that the players felt that too. And in 18, when Judge hit the homer, there's no way in hell we're losing this game. The players felt that too, I think. So I agree with you. Like the no fans thing could help a team like the Twins, could help a team like the Athletics, where they don't have to go to New York for an 8:00 start in the lights in the raucous Yankee Stadium. They don't have to deal with that, So I agree with you. This is a crapshoot if I've ever seen one. And it should be interesting. I just pray to God that we're healthy before the playoffs, and we'll see what happens.
Alrighty. One last question, because we've been going on. I mean, we could go on and on.
I know.
But one last question, and this I definitely wanted to save this for the end because it could be a very controversial question, and that's the whole point of it. I love to stir the pot a little bit, as they say, just to get some productive answers and a different side of the box. But what do you think about the Houston Astros? Because a lot of people gave me some slack and would go back through my old tweets when the Astros were, I want to say they were like at least four games from 500, I would say. Mm-hmm. There were people that were tweeting me, they were like, is this you saying the Astros were going to come out and start swinging? And then I'm like, dude, it's a small sample size. Are you serious? Are we really judging it over like 2 weeks of baseball? And now, I go to, MLB, and look at the standings, and the Astros, I know it's not the best in the league, but they're still 17-14.
Right.
I know the Athletics are clearly, taking charge in that AL West, and that's why I think the Athletics deserve more recognition than what people are giving them.
Yeah.
But to think the Astros, I mean, obviously having Verlander out, that's a huge blow.
Alvarez. Yeah, Ozuna.
But the thing is, even outside of the cheating, outside of Altuve, but to be fair, Altuve's been picking his numbers back up. Outside of the cheating scandal, I always thought that even though I don't like the Astros because of what they did, I don't think anyone outside of Houston likes the Astros for obvious reasons. I don't have to explain that. But I can't sit there and say that I would think that a team with guys like Bregman and Altuve and Springer and Jordan and there's no way that you could sit there and tell me this team's just going to fall apart magically, especially in a season where they're not going to have any fans booing them. They're not going to have those outside sources conflicting with their mental, mental game. So I don't know. I've always thought since before the season started, I was like, maybe the Astros obviously, will run into some spikes because of, they don't know every pitch that's coming.
Right.
But I can't also sit there and say that they're going to be a bad team and not make the postseason or not be productive. That's insanity.
Yeah.
So I just want to know what you thought about that.
So, I mean, And as far as like the cheating stuff, like I look at, George Springer's numbers and even like Altuve's numbers. He has the highest like K percentage this year. I think even with the no fans, some of this I think is weighing on them. But before like COVID and everything, like even my fantasy, like Bregman might have been the only guy that I really would have went for besides the pitchers fantasy wise early, because I really thought that between the media, the fans, and opposing players that they were going to have a really, really rough year. I mean, now you look at it, there's no fans. They're in a media room doing a Zoom conference. They're not huddled around their locker with 20 media mics in their face. It's completely, completely different. Now, I knew going into the season that they were a talented team. Obviously, the guys you named, Alvarez, Correa, Springer, Altuve, they're still a talented team, Bregman. But I did think that in a normal year that they could struggle a little bit. And maybe that's what happened earlier on in the year, because it was still fresh. It was still kind of awkward to them taking the field. Everybody knew what happened. Now, as the season's going along and you're not seeing like, people throwing at them intentionally, you're not getting the questions about the cheating as much. Now maybe you're seeing them settle in a little bit and play better. But yeah, I mean, they were still a talented team. As much as I don't like them, they're still a talented team. I do think, knowing what's coming is a huge advantage. And I've had debates with people, what was worse, that or steroids? I think if a whole team has an idea of what's coming, that helps your walk rate, helps you foul off bad pitches or foul off tough pitches. That'll maybe lead to, a mistake pitch later on in the at-bat. I think knowing what's coming is a huge, huge advantage. But, I would be foolish to say that they are still not talented players. So while I thought they might struggle this year, and I had a preview podcast for the 60-game season, I did pick the Athletics to beat them just because I don't like the Astros, and I thought the Athletics were loaded. But, they're still a talented team. There's still talent there. But I do think early on some of that stuff was weighing on them. And I think in a normal year, we'd still be seeing a little bit of that with the media. And obviously they'd be coming to New York late this year. So that would, obviously stir the whole pot up again. So with the shortened season, I think obviously it helped them with all the BS. But I agree with you. They're a talented team. As much as you hate them, which I do, I hate them. They're still a talented team. Look, I despise the Red Sox. I'll always hate the Red Sox #1. But I can sit there and tell you that Xander Bogaerts is a damn good player. I call it like I see it. But, I agree with you. The Astros are still a talented team. But I also read an article that people believe there could be a mass exodus from there, that players believe they'll never leave that stigma of being a cheater if they stay in Houston. A guy like Springer, a guy like Correa, that maybe they leave. I read a couple articles like that. But as they're, right now, even like Gurriel's a good player, fully healthy with Alvarez. They have a lot of talent in that roster. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with you.
And that's the thing. Like, I don't want to come off as defending what they did.
Of course.
There's no excuse for what they did. They know what they did, and they're suffering the consequences, rightfully so.
I think it was a big advantage to them. I really thought it was a big advantage.
Yeah, definitely. I don't have the number right in front of me, but when Clayton Kershaw, one of the best regular season pitchers of all time, I still think in my mind Clayton Kershaw should have a ring right now. Because
I agree.
How many was it? Was it at least 50 breaking pitches with no swings and misses?
And that's his bread and butter pitch.
Yeah, it's like, really? Are you kidding me? Kershaw is known for that 12 to 6 o'clock curveball, and you're telling me that not a single hitter in the entire game swung and missed. That is hard for me to believe.
They stole that ring in 17. Whether it was from us or there's no, in my opinion, they should not have that ring in 17. From that, in that game that was in Houston, there's a video on YouTube, I'm sure you've watched it too, of the 50 pitches, obviously, and then you hear like trash cans banging. And he, what did he give up? 5 runs that game in like 4 innings or something? Like it was just complete bullshit. It's crazy.
And final point.
Sure.
That's why I get sick and tired of so many people who still give Clayton Kershaw crap.
Yeah.
Because he's still like one of the greatest regular season pitchers I've ever seen.
Still pitching well to this day. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like, do we forget that the Astros basically stole a ring from him and the rest of that team? Like, are you guys going to forget that?
I'd be livid if I'm Kershaw, because the knock on him was always, he can't get done the postseason. But how do you expect to get good players out that know what's coming? That makes your job 20 times, 100 times harder, So I'd be livid if I was him.
All right, well, we are at around over an hour, so
Perfect.
Definitely a pretty good time frame. We could probably keep talking on.
Definitely.
But I work today, unfortunately, even though
Yeah, I'm waiting for a
so.
delivery that should be here any minute. So this is perfect time to end it.
Alrighty. Well, is there anything else you want to say other than thank you for being on here. I definitely would like to have you on in the future. If you ever want me to be on your podcast, definitely let me know, and I will be on there in a heartbeat. So I'm usually a free person, but is there anything else you want to get off your chest or anything like that?
Oh, I want to say thanks for having me on. I've been a big fan of yours. I watch your podcast. You're like one of the first pages I go to. Like if Judge hits a bomb, and I want to see it 25 more times, I type in your name and I know you have the video up there. So you're a great follow on Twitter, and I'd love to have you on my podcast. And if you don't mind, I'll pop it. It's the LGY podcast. Would love to have you on. We'll definitely work on that soon. And again, appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
And I will put his podcast and his Twitter account in the description below. Do you have a YouTube channel?
I don't, not yet, okay. Not yet. I had so many different plans for like a normal season that I think I'm going to end up doing next year. But yeah, give me a follow on Twitter at GoDJ2, and we'll definitely do something in the future. This was a lot of fun. You do a great job, man.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Well, this has been podcast number 25. Hope all of you guys enjoyed the podcast. I know there's no Yankee game today, but definitely rest and buckle up because this 5-game series in 5-game series in 3 days could be very bumpy versus the Mets. I have no idea what we're going to get out of this. Hopefully the Yankees can at least take 3 out of 5. That's what I'm asking for. If they somehow win 4 or 5, win all of them and sweep the Mets, I also won't complain. But as long as we get 3 out of 5 with the current predicament that we're in, I will be happy with that. But other than that, hope you guys enjoy the rest of your night and see you later.